So here we're going to look at the King on Vietnam speech, and I've selected this piece just so you could think of Martin Luther King Jr. as more than a civil rights demonstrator, somebody who's really trying to bring change for the United States in the 1960s. So I'm just going to look at a couple of sections here. I'm not really going to go through every item because I do want you to be able to, put your, try to process this on your own. There's a couple things I want to point out here. He says here, this speech is not addressed to Hanoi or the NLF, is not addressed to China or Russia. So he's clear about the audience that he is trying to address, and throughout this particular speech, he's definitely going to look at the United States' view with regard to the war in Vietnam. He's also going to be addressing poverty and the racial issue in the United States. So he lists his reasons and his views on the conflict. Here he talks about his deeper level of awareness, his third reason. He talks about the desperate, rejected, angry young men. They ask, and rightly so, what about Vietnam? And they're looking at the violence that they believe the United States is using to deal with the particular situation. And keep in mind that during the 60s, the turbulent 60s, they're dealing with the civil rights movement, and they're also dealing with the conflict in Vietnam. Here he addresses the issue about you being a civil rights leader. Here he says, we are convinced that we could not limit our vision to certain rights for Black people, but instead affirm the conviction that America would never be free or safe from itself until the descendants of its slaves were loosed completely from the shackles still wear. In a way, we are agreeing with Langston Hughes, that Black bard from Harlem, who had written earlier. So there he is referencing Langston Hughes, who he addressed in the 1920s, looking at the Harlem Renaissance. All right, so this section right here, I think, is interesting, where he's looking at trying to see this through the eyes of the Vietnamese and how they must see Americans as strange liberators. Here he talks about the Vietnamese proclaiming their own independence. We looked at the Vietnamese Declaration of Independence. That was one of the early documents that we looked at. Here he looks at the combined French and Japanese occupation, which is a reference to World War II, as well as the French Indochina War. We decided to support France in its reconquest of her former colony. So that's, again, looking at World War II and how after World War II, the United States supported giving the French colony back as opposed to helping the people of Vietnam, which would be in line with the Atlantic Charter that we had mentioned during the Cold War section. What else do we have here? Government seeking self-determination and a government that had been established not by China. So again, he's addressing that particular point. And here he's simply just looking at the conflict through the Vietnamese. Notice here how he references Dien Bien Phu, which we had addressed in class. Also, Diem, who was assassinated, which led to the United States presence in the region. Here he looks at the peasants. How do the peasants view us? The National Liberation Front, which are the people from the South, but they identify and support the North. Here he talks about the term VC, or the communists. So that's all I'm going to say about this particular speech. Just wanted to look at a couple of these items. So for the most part, you would be responsible for reading and trying to process some of these items. This may or may not be used on a test. We'll talk about this item in class. And I just wanted to address a couple of items here as you proceed trying to process this speech on your own.